works with Strive and CPM. He's a consultant for both of those. He's going to be joining Eva Martinez, who is over at Stevenson College, but she also has experience in the high school setting, in the collegiate setting, in the clinical setting, right? And she's currently working on her DAT at FIU with Dr. Jeff Conan, who's been on here multiple times. And then, of course, if it's got to do with leadership, John was like just willing to drive down to Houston to get out of the cold weather and come talk about leadership. I'm just lying. But John Seco is, of course, joining us as we discuss leadership and athletic training. And so the point of the conversation today is diversity and inclusion. So Eva's working on her doctoral studies, and with being a Hispanic female, or as she would say, a brown female, she often misses that. And so just earlier in the conversation with Sophia was the first 9 years of her life, she lived in Mexico, right? And then she came over here to Texas. So I asked her, is it offensive if somebody says Mexican? She says, well, it depends, And then we also had the conversation about what's it like for you seeing leadership. Well, the principal at our school is a Hispanic female. She was also an immigrant from Mexico. And so she said, she hasn't really experienced the lack of the diversity in leadership, but we're also here in Texas, which is just across the border from Mexico. So it would be interesting to hear this conversation, especially with you being up in the Northeast and going from there. So without much further ado, this is your conversation, Eva. Why don't you get us started?
Yeah, so I also grew up in Texas, and so in Texas, I was Northeast Texas. I did see a little bit of lack, but I didn't realize it until I moved up north to Michigan, where I then realized that there are other people besides just Mexican or brown people and white people. I didn't really see much diverse of African Americans or Black people in growing up in schools or at teachers, didn't see that. And then when I got into to Michigan, I did start to see that there was more diversity in that sense, that there was Black people, brown people, white people, Asians. When I was in fifth grade, I think I saw my first Black person, and it was a shocker because I grew up with nothing but white people and brown people. So the further that I got in my education, in my master, or even at Michigan State where I did my undergrad, the diversity, it just wasn't there. It's a predominantly white institution. And so when you isolate that to athletic training, the diversity in itself has been decreased. There's not very many people of color. I was the only person of color that was in that program at Michigan State. And then further on, when I did my master's, there was only 3 people of color in my master's program. And then the difference here now in my DAT program is, I think, has to do with the location, but it being down in Miami, there's a lot of brown people. There's a lot of people that look like me. There's people that speak Spanish in the program, and from different areas as of brown, quote unquote. There's Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, Cubans. There's just a wide span of Latinos in athletic training in the DAT level. So it's very diverse and different. But I did notice that lack of diversity or inclusion, and now in leadership, I also see it in athletics overall, but athletic training as well.
All right. It's crazy just to think that, honestly, you said 5th grade before you ever saw a Black person?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's just so weird. And I'm sure Marco, being out in LA, he said he's raised out there in the San Diego, LA area, and I'm sure he had similar diversities, especially with him being Hispanic, right? But it being LA. Marco, tell us just a little bit about your experience growing up.
Well, I grew up in LA. I was born in San Diego. My parents moved up to the city of LA when I was maybe about 2 or 3 years old, so I don't recall much of the San Diego life. But the one unique thing about growing up in LA, I kind of grew up in the South Central area, right by USC. We lived literally 4 or 5 blocks. I could walk over to USC. The one beauty about LA is that I guess I had the advantage of there's a huge diversity in LA. It's very similar to New York. You obviously have South Centrals where you have a lot of African Americans, so you have Latinos, and also you have predominantly white areas. But then if you go throughout the whole entire city of LA, you have little pockets of different ethnicity, so to speak. You have Little Italy, you have Chinatown, you have Little Koreatown, You have Little Armenia and stuff like that. So I've had the opportunity, and I guess that's one of the advantages that I guess I felt I was able to kind of learn and be able to expose myself to a bunch of diversities. But having said that, at the same time, being Latino and being in the community, so to speak, in that area, you kind of almost kept yourself isolated to a certain extent. You only kind of went out of your neighborhood, out of your area if you needed to. Otherwise, you kind of just stayed within an area. I mean, there's statistics out there that majority of people, especially minorities or teenagers, tend to not venture on more than maybe a mile or a couple of miles from where they grew up. So kind of growing up in Eva, growing up in Texas and going all the way to Michigan to go for undergrad. That's, as far as like a Latina or Latino, that's kind of unheard of, because you stay within, you always want to stay home, within near your parents, you want to stay home. So majority of students tend to go to university that's very local, that's nearby. You can drive. It's rare that you go from one climate to the other climate, from one side of the country to the other side of the country. That's like, you don't hear, I mean, that's super uncommon. But at the same time, I think it's great. I think that's what individuals, and when you're young, you want to do that. You want to get exposed to other ethnicities. You want to expose yourself to other environments. That's how you learn. That's how you grow. That's how you adapt. If you just stay isolated in one area and you just learn what you know, I think you're hindering yourself. You're isolating yourself, and I think that's one of the worst things you want to do for yourself.
John, have you noticed a lack of inclusion and diversity in leadership in athletics or in athletic training ever, like either in your undergrad education or your master's education or whatever the case is?
Yeah, it's very similar for myself. I grew up, or I am a Latino as well. So growing up, I was very close to my family. So having that inclusion, and in Detroit, it's Southwest Detroit. Anybody that's from the area, they know that that's the large Hispanic area. That's where we go for the good food, right? Downtown and Southwest. But growing up, I tended to actually identify more with my white side. So my father is Polish. He's European. So I tended to identify more with that outside of my family. So I went away to a school that was predominantly white. So I went further away and I struggled. So I think this is going to be a good question coming probably a little bit later, is talking about identifying our ethnicities in our profession and in leadership too, because I think that creates a difficult portion too. But when it comes to leadership and ethnicity and our profession, I typically haven't had an issue with finding it. I've found that there are more people of different color, different backgrounds, different race that are from different backgrounds. And that's been a really good thing for me, because it's helped me identify with my heritage, with my ethnicity. I work with Central Michigan University as a internship coordinator. Dr. Shingles is one of the she is the program director for Central Michigan, and she is a huge name when it comes to diversity within the athletic training. So to have her as a colleague, as somebody I talk to on the frequent, that's helped me with my identity, helped me with understanding diversity and inclusion within our profession. So like I said, growing up, it was difficult because I was trying to find my identity within my ethnicity. It took me to get into the profession a couple years into the profession to really identify other people and to have people of other backgrounds come forward and identify themselves as leaders in the profession of athletic training.
Yeah. So like, as you were saying, so do you believe that like, if you are of a different race, or if you are in a more diverse environment, do you think that you have to have different skill sets to be able to tend to the environment that you're working with as a leader?
I don't believe so. I believe if you have certain skills and knowledge when it comes to leading others, leading your peers, being able to communicate is such a very important thing. If you have an understanding of people's backgrounds and you're able to really communicate, make good relationships with people, I think that is a key in being able to be a leader within our profession. So I don't know if that's necessarily an ethical or ethnic background type of question. I kind of look at it as a whole. And I do understand that people may not have those because of their backgrounds, or they may have difficulty because they've never, like you said, have never met somebody of another race. And so how do you communicate with an African American? How do you communicate with a Muslim? How do you communicate with a white person from Houston, Texas?
Yeah. I mean, it's a big challenge. And I don't know, I kind of think that if you are someone who is not as worldly or as diverse, or can bring all of that to the table, and you're working with people who are, then it makes it a little challenging for you to kind of express what you're trying to get across to them, or you're going to have different leadership skills than someone who hasn't been exposed to all these different types of environments or different backgrounds. You're going to bring something else to the table because you have been exposed to that.
So what does diversity mean to you, Eva?
It's a range of everything. It's race, ethnicity, culture, beliefs, values, morals. Like, it's all in a combination of that, and it kind of just makes up this character of who you are. And so when all those like types of people get together and come like work together, or in the same place together, or have the same values or the same beliefs, and I think that's what makes up like the most diversity.
I'm going to shoot this message out to Marco. Hopefully, I don't know if he sees it. I know he's having trouble with the audio on his end, but if he can read that message, hopefully we can help him that way.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. For some reason, I can't hear John. I don't know why. It's weird because I guess the definition of diversity can vary. Obviously, when you think of diversity as being exposed or being sensitive, or acknowledging people's different backgrounds, different cultures, different rituals, different ideas, ideology, opinions, and whatnot.
Right.
Being open to it and be very respectful towards it. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it, but at least understanding where they're coming from. And then, as a leader, I think that's one of the questions that you asked Eva right now, as far as the leadership. Do you have to be aware and be sensitive? And is diversity a key issue when you are being a leader? I think by all means, because you're working with different individuals. Even, and here's the thing about it, even within, if let's say you are working in a lot of your employees or whoever you're working are all of the same race, they tend to be a different religious background, different opinions. So even if it's all Caucasians, whether it's all Latinos come from different backgrounds, meaning there's the Mexican Latinos, there's the South American Latinos, the Central American Latinos. And that's one thing, like, I realized when I was in college, one of my group of friends, one of them was from Peru, the other one was from Nicaragua, the other one she was Mexican. So even within that little group, which you would think, they're all Latinos, there's not much diversity, but I quickly realized, hey, his tradition from Peru was slightly different than his tradition from Nicaragua. So you always have to be aware of that. So you would think you would see a community of all Caucasians or all Latinos, and you'd be like, there's not much diversity there. But there is. Caucasians, you have the Western, I guess Caucasian, then you have the Texas Caucasian, then you have the Northeast. Even within that's, they all have different ideas, different backgrounds, different traditions, different everything. So even though you would see a group and say, hey, you know what, they're not diverse, they're still diverse.
Right. They're still bringing different things to the table because of their background and experiences that they've had.
I think one of the things that when we start looking at,
obviously, the one thing I guess a lot of people tend to neglect is it's also, I'm sorry, John.
No worries. No.
I can't hear. It's also like their socioeconomic background. I think that's one of the biggest issues as far as that you have to consider and you cannot neglect. And that is a major key factor. Sorry, go ahead, John.
Okay. So one of the things that I've kind of learned over my time is obviously, like Marco had just said, with even when you look at a certain race, there are differences within those races right there. Like he said, there's differences between the Caucasians from the west to the east, and there's differences even within the Mexican. And as I do more and more communication, relationship building with my students, with the people I work with, I found that it's very important to find the similarities between us. Once we link those similarities between us, the differences kind of go away. It helps you actually understand the differences more. You understand, like Marco had said, talk about the different cultures and understanding them. You may not agree with them. It may not be something you've been raised with, you've learned from. But if you are able to identify the similarities between each person, that helps you become a better leader, build better relationships. It doesn't mean that you're going to be able to order them around or know how to order them around or whatever. We're looking at when a lot of times when we talk about so the bridge between different cultures, different ethnicities, because of the similarities, it helps so much more.
Yeah. How do you think you can still be a leader in a diverse environment when there's when you're not the one in charge, or you're not the one who is like the head athletic trainer, or like what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I think we've talked about this on the podcast before, but the idea of leading up and down the chain. And that's one of the things that I've taken from over the past couple of years of doing our leadership podcast is even though we're not typically at the top of the hierarchy, or if we're not quote unquote the head athletic trainer or the leader, we still have influence on the people above and below us. And that goes back to understanding similarities between us, how to communicate to different people. If somebody has a different background on how they've communicated, how do you communicate with that person? What are the similarities, between, everybody? And once you're able to bridge those things, you're able to communicate and actually lead up those chains of command or down the chains of command, depending on where you're at in the organization or in your department.
I missed the last part, but it's okay.
Marco, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I can hear you,
okay.
John, but I can't hear Eva.
You can't hear me?
But you know what? It's interesting how, like you mentioned, as far as you kind of touched a little bit about being the head trainer, assistant trainer, or different levels, even a grad assistant, and kind of like the diversity and the leadership skills that are involved. And it's weird because everybody tends to play a role at the end of the day, whether you're the assistant trainer, whether you're a grad assistant, or even your head athletic trainer, whether you're the director of sports medicine, whatever role it is. When I was with the Lakers, I had the opportunity of being both an outsider when I was with the Sparks and kind of entering and helping with them. Then I became the assistant trainer, which then my role kind of changed as far as yes, I wasn't when you think of the leadership or the leader, you think of the head athletic trainer, you think of the director, the GM, but to some extent, my interaction with the athletes was connected to the head athletic trainer. So my job was to work with the athletes, understand the diversity, understand everything of that sort, but also communicate both, like you mentioned, up and below up to the head athletic trainer, so he can understand better and kind of keep that line of communication. So the overall leadership or the overall diversity is being kind of involved within the athletic training, so to speak. So it's not just the head athletic trainer has to be aware of the diversity, and he or she is kind of so-called a leader and knows everything, but he or she, now that when I became the head athletic trainer, I felt I was more dependent on and felt I had to rely more on the assistant athletic trainers and the interns that we had in there, because as a head athletic trainer, I kept being pulled into meetings that sometimes I wasn't involved too much in the athletic training room or the athletic training setting, that I felt like, hey, you know what, I'm more dependent on the assistant athletic trainers to help me become a leader and be a leader. Then I thought, when I became the position, I'm like, okay, this means that I'm a great leader. No, it's like, it just means that you are at the top, and you have to be able to allow other people to help you and be open for that help. Because I think if you close yourself for that, that is when you lose kind of the leadership, or you don't become a leader, so to speak.
Yeah, it makes it a little challenging to be know when to delegate and know when to just accept that help and be open towards that.
Yeah, you also have to make very, very clear lines when it comes to the people that you delegate to and the people you report to as well. And we've talked about relationship building. We've talked about communication, finding similarities. Sometimes those similarities really fuzz the line when it comes to communication between people. So if you're one of 4 or 5 athletic trainers or assistant athletic trainers, and you may have a cultural similarity with your head athletic trainer or somebody you report to. Those can be viewed a little bit different. But if you're able to communicate those clear lines with those people, become a little bit more professional, and really, not toe the line, but or fuzz the line yourself. I think that helps when it comes to the hierarchy of when it comes to delegating powers, delegating issues, delegating, anything that needs to be done as a leader. It's understanding those similarities, but it's also setting those aside when things need to be done.
I know I've asked Marco this question about how he felt like growing in his career as a Latino, and how did he get there, and like what were some steps that he took to like build his success and not have that imposter syndrome of not belonging or not fitting in because he was the only brown person, or just the minority in the education and the profession itself. That there's not much diversity in the profession, that majority of the members of NATA are of white or Caucasian descent. So like, what are some things that, everyone wants to have someone similar to them in a workplace, someone that they can relate to their upbringing and can share like cultural norms. So as like a new athletic trainer of color coming into the profession, when people don't really look like me, like what is your thoughts or opinion on like how to find success or like professional growth in that area?
It's reaching out to other athletic trainers. It's networking, it's meeting other people. You may not meet somebody that has a lot of similarities to yourself, but maybe through one person you can find another person. And that's just kind of creating that network branch of people. So it is like when you're able to, or you have a question, you reach out to one person and says, hey, I don't have the answer for you, but I know somebody else who may. And then it's kind of reaching out to that person. Just because that person has a similarity to you, or that you want to hear, or they may not be the type of person you want to listen to. But it's continuously expanding your network of people. And then just kind of remembering, why is that person important in your network? Are they going to help you with, are they going to help you with a certain issue, a cultural issue? Are they going to help you with, identification or something like that? It's just continuously growing that network. So you have more people to bounce questions off of, and the more questions you ask, the more questions you're going to be able to ask in the future, and the more questions you're going to actually populate in the future too. So you may just have one question about being a Latina in the college setting, but if you ask the right person, it can breed more questions going forward. And the more questions you have, the more informed you're going to be as that person that you want to be.
Yeah, that's true. Do you feel, because you identified, I don't know how long you identified more with your white side than your Latino side, but do you feel that is a reason why you didn't notice a lack of inclusion? Like for me, I know that I'm hypersensitive in the sense of the lack of diversity, or like just like racial comments or stereotypes that would be said or in situations. Mostly I would notice them because I'm sensitive to the situations, like I've experienced that kind of stuff. And so like now I'm more aware. So do you feel like because you didn't relate that's reason as to why you weren't so sensitive to it?
Yeah, it's exactly why I'm not so sensitive to it. I am like a teeter-totter when it comes to my ethnicity. There's days where I'm 100% a Mexican, and there's days where I'm 100% a white European male. But hearing something definitely tips the scale back. So Jeremy asking the question before we started recording, how, when he said the word brown, I wasn't really paying attention. And then when he said it, it like clicked it over, and I was like, whoa. I was like, oh, he's just asking a question. And, like, I love that. I love that he's asking a question. But if I were in the athletic training room and somebody said, they said a racial slur about Mexican, like, I'd be very quick to shut that down. I'd also be very, very quick to shut down, somebody. So my father's Polish. He was born in a concentration camp. So if somebody were to say something about a Nazi, it's going to tip the scale back for me, and I'm gonna quick to shut it down too. But I've learned that just shutting a conversation down or shutting a slur down doesn't really do anything. It's about educating the people who are saying those things. So especially in the high school setting, because kids are so apt to say things that they really don't understand as a joke or as a high school student, whatever. I have to be the adult and educate that person. And you have to do it too in the college setting. You probably have to do it in the professional world too, because those people have gone that long saying those certain things and not understanding why they're saying those things. So
or the root
I,
behind it and how
yes. So I have to be more apt to educate why it's offensive to myself and why it could be offensive to other people. So that's where I think growing up and having this ambiguous idea of who I am has helped me. It's kind of hindered me, but it's also helped me understand it a little bit more too. And also being in Detroit, the largest Muslim population, people actually look at me and they think I'm Arabic or they think I'm a Muslim. So it's like they a lot of times people are like, are you Italian? Are you an Arab? And I'm like, no, I'm actually Mexican and Polish.
Yeah.
So it's like throw things up in the air and say, okay, well, I'm able to actually disarm people because of those things, which has been very, very beneficial for me because sometimes when you see somebody, you can identify them as their cultural background, you automatically put them in that box. And that's a terrible thing that we all do. Every single one of us do. And when it happens to us, we hate it.
Right.
So we have to be constantly in the mindset of not placing people in those boxes because they can be, one, offensive, and two, you could be very wrong about the box you've put that person into.
Right. Those type of situations have occurred and just become more I just become more sensitive to those type of situations, especially in the athletic training room, or even as far as within the profession, like at big conferences like NATA or scenarios like that. You just see people that look like you, and you kind of expect that they're gonna kind of have some of those cultural norms, and most of it has to come with like, I'm seeking this, like this is something that I really want and desire, to have other people that look like me, that have similar cultural norms as I do, to want to be a part of the profession and want to like see it from the eyes that I see it from, and not necessarily the backgrounds that they kind of have seen it through. I just the question or the comment and the thoughts come from the profession moving to the master's level, and I just have so much to say in the sense that, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I know that there are a lot of Latinos that won't, or a lot of brown people, like Black people, that won't pursue a master's because of the amount it costs, or won't pursue it because of the time it takes. And so that, to me, in my head, I just feel like you're already decreasing the pool of people of color that want to have to try to join this organization or be a part of of NATA, or be an athletic trainer and get through the education so that they can become an athletic trainer.
Yeah. And I think that kind of stems a little bit if you look at the background, as far as if you look at the students' parents. Majority of them don't have much of an education, let alone an undergrad, forget a master's, and don't even think about a PhD program. As far as my parents, both my parents were immigrants. They came from Mexico down to the United States. My dad has a sixth grade education. He dropped out after sixth grade, and my mom dropped out after fourth grade. But the one advantage I think that I had is that my dad, and actually both my parents, understood the importance of education, and they kind of pushed us and pushed us and pushed us. So that's why I went ahead and was able to pursue a master's, and eventually I also wanted to pursue a PhD. But kind of going back to your point, John, as far as the kind of the leadership, and then like when you hear like racial slurs or racial comments, it's kind of interesting because it's kind of something popped in my head. Like you mentioned, either one or two things usually I've noticed in a training room or any environment. When someone makes a racial comment, either to one or two things. Either one, they're really ignorant and they don't understand. And I think that's when you take an opportunity where you stop and you educate them. Or two, you understand, they're not ignorant, and they're really making a racial remark. And then, of course, that's like you mentioned, that's where you stop it, nip it in the bud, and say, hey, you know what, this is not good to do. The other concept, also kind of like what Eva was referring to, and I think I referred to earlier, as far as diversity and kind of getting out of your comfort zone, and meaning by comfort zone is that you grew up in a certain environment, certain about friends, and you guys all joke around, and you make the same racial jokes and stuff like that, but you just see it as jokes. And unless once you go out of that environment, that's when you kind of realize that, okay, wait a minute, this is not a joke anymore. And it's kind of funny because the other day I was walking down the street at a crosswalk, and the gentleman that was at the crosswalk was Latino, he was Mexican, and he made like a Chinese racial remark where, you know, 20 years ago when I was a little kid, within my friends, which were all Latinos, I would have been like, ah ha ha, that's funny. But when he made this comment, I was like, oh, wait a minute, that's not funny. But you know, like I said, when I was a young, and you know, Eva knows exactly what she smiles. As a young kid, if it was they would have made that remark, I would have laughed, we would all laugh, haha. You know, that's just we're used to it. But I think that's kind of the same thing. But I'm assuming, and probably is that it happens the same in every community, in every racial community. It's just as long as you stay within that community, that's where you learn. Those are the habits, those are the jokes, and everybody laughs, and you just kind of move on. But when you get out of that comfort zone, out of that environment, to different, like you mentioned, Eva, you're up in Michigan State, then you start seeing different things, different perspectives, different ideas, different environments, which is, I think, it's a great opportunity. I think everybody should be able to get out of that comfort zone. I know a lot of people can because of the socioeconomic background, or like Eva mentioned, is that it's not ingrained in you to go to undergrad, it's not ingrained in you to go to a master's program or PhD, you know, so it's kind of different.
So, Ava, I want to go back to your work within the DAT program at FIU. What are you finding within your research when it comes to diversity and leadership?
That there's not much, that it's very limited. And in order for it to grow, there needs to be more of it so other people can learn how to be, how to teach people, like a diverse population, how to teach them how to be leaders, as well as how to teach leaders qualities and characters that still align with their own beliefs and values and cultural norms, as well as like a part of the business's mission, vision, credos, and so that they can align together.
What do you think hinders that?
The fact that they can't find that similarity that you were talking about, like they can't begin to see eye to eye because their experiences have not allowed them to grow together, and because they're just letting that difference grow and become a wall instead of allowing the similarities to become the normal, the level, you know.
So, Marco, you talked about 20 years ago, we may have made a joke, or somebody may have made a joke, but you've learned over time that certain things are inappropriate to say, they're wrong to say, those jokes just aren't correct anymore. How do you feel, or what do you think is the best way for somebody to go about understanding that what they're saying on an individual basis? How do people go about understanding that those things could be wrong, and can help kind of break down the walls that Eva was talking about that hinder more inclusion, more diversity within leadership or within the profession of athletic training?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, you were kind of cutting out a little bit there. Real quick, what was the question again?
So we're talking about, you know, what's hindering diversity in leadership. I asked, 20 years ago, we may have made jokes. Maybe 10 years ago, we may have made jokes or said certain things that are offensive now, or we have learned that they're offensive. How do people individually go about finding if what they're saying is offensive? And how do we, as individuals, learn not to become offensive or say certain offensive things that would build those walls that are hindering diversity within leadership of the in the profession of athletic training?
As far as like as far as like the walls that are hindering, as far as the investment in like diversity in athletic training, is that correct?
Yes.
First started as a student. There was a Dr. Gray out in Riverside that kind of made a comment to me. I think I might have told Eva this. That sports science or medicine in general, any type of medicine, there's two aspects to medicine. there's the science behind it, which is kind of easy to learn. You go to school, you know, you get A's and you graduated, blah blah, and you get CU's, and you kind of learn the science. And then there's the art behind it. And the diversity education part is a big part of the art portion of it. And I think a lot of the programs, especially in athletic training, because you interact with a lot of people, to neglect that aspect as far as some of the courses. You take the human physiology, you take the human anatomy, you take human genetics, you take taping 101, you take everything that how to be able to apply it, how to be a great trainer or athlete, so to speak. But as far as the science, I think that's one of the areas that a lot of universities kind of don't focus on. And I think slowly by slowly they have been kind of focused in the area to be aware that, hey, you're interacting with other individuals. There's an art behind it too. You're also interacting with people from different diversities, and you have to be aware of that. I have to kind of go really quick, but there's a saying that that I kind of discovered a few days ago, that it kind of goes to what you mentioned, John, as far as people evolving. And it was something about if it doesn't evolve me, I don't want it to involve me.
Oh, that's a good.
Which I thought it was kind of a great saying, and I kind of use it a lot nowadays. So if it's something, whether it's either educational, whether it's spiritual, whatever it is, if it doesn't involve me, I don't want it to involve me, so to speak. But hey, I got to get going, but it was great. Hopefully we'll catch up guys later.
Thank you, Marco.
Thank you, Marco.
Jeremy, do you have any questions related to diversity? I know we've been very, I don't want to say heavy on the Latino side, and I want to hear your perspective from some of the things that we've said today as a Caucasian, as a white male.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think both of y'all kind of mentioned was, or especially Eva said, or I think Marco was like, I don't know, whatever the point is. Like we'll get kids who get college scholarship offers. So here in Houston, they may get an offer for a scholarship in Louisiana or for Arkansas or something like that. So they get an offer to play sports in a place that's away. Or we had one turn down an offer for, or she accepted the offer and ended up not going for a college that was an hour and a half away, right? And so for me, I'm like, that's just stupid, right? But
Sounds dumb.
well, yeah, right. It is. But then, as we're having this conversation, like, there's more to it. There's the cultural, the family influence. Like for me, it was like, you know, hey, I'm 18, I'm out of the house, I'm gone, right? You know, and that's just like y'all were saying, that's normal for a white family, right? Because my parents both graduated high school. My older sister, you know, was in college at the time when I graduated. So that was just, that's what's normal is you go off. She was already living in a different city. You know, that's just normal. You just go away from home and you do it. So just talk to me a little bit more about that experience in how we can, as athletic trainers or leaders or whatever, relate to those athletes who are trying to decide whether or not to take college scholarships away from home.
Yeah, it's a big challenge. I mean, in the sense of like you said, there's a lot of culture with it, especially as a first generation higher education student, as first generation American, and if your parents are both immigrants, it's hard to even communicate the fact that there's a college that wants me to play sports, and then if you're a female at that, your dad may not even want you to play sports. That might not be even the case, and you may have been playing these sports behind his back. And it all comes from these cultural norms. At least I can only speak for Latinos or like my Mexican culture, is the fact that like at the end of it, you are already, Marco shared this video with me and I'll send you a link for it, but you're, as a person of color, you already stand 10 feet behind the white American. You already have this barrier because of how you grew up, or because of your past experiences, or because of the way that your parents grew up. And it's not necessarily always the case for people of color, but majority of it is that you're going to be starting 10 feet behind in the race always. And there's videos, there's pictures that, you know, depict this, but at the end of the day, it's very challenging to try to encourage that. And it could be like a West Indies, Caribbean, Latinos, like Asians, and try to encourage them to go an hour drive away from home. And the biggest concern will be like, well, who's going to watch your younger siblings? Who's going to get gas money for you to drive back home if I need you? Who's going to run the farm? Who's going to take care of your grandma? Like these are all these pressures, these outside pressures that come to that young adult that's trying to figure out their life and want to know that's the best option for them.
Yeah. So along the same lines, I have a family member who is Hispanic, and she had a college scholarship offer, but her dad didn't want her to take it because that was not what women do. Like similar to what you're saying, like, no, it's not what you're supposed to do. You shouldn't be playing sports, shouldn't be going to college. And so ended up not getting a college scholarship, having to pay a lot of money for college, and just thinking about how that she ended up graduating from college, but just the life change that would have happened if the cultural barrier could have been worked through. So it just crazy situations where, like, until I have these conversations, I don't understand. I'm like, that's just dumb. But wait a minute,
Right.
let's take a step back. Let's look. So
yeah, and that's great that you can take that step back, because I know that I've had coworkers in the past and people that I've encountered with that do not see that there is a difference between us, which is like a good thing in a sense, but at the same time, it's just an ignorance that they don't realize that we are different people and we bring different things to the table. And so you expecting me to have X, Y, and Z that you have is very challenging because of all the adversity that I had to face as a child or younger.
So this is titled Diversity and Inclusion in Athletic Trainer Leadership. And so we've talked a lot about the diversity. What does inclusion mean to you? What does that look like?
Again, it's making sure that, like, my coworkers or my classmates, that they're able to notice that we do have that difference and acknowledge it, accept it, and then like dive into the similarities and build on those things. What about for you, John?
I think it's the same thing. It's understanding and building on those things, and constantly learning. We're talking about putting together another episode for Ramadan, and that was something that got pushed on, or asked. I shouldn't say push. It was asked of me last year to inform our community on Ramadan and our athletics. So I had to once again step out of my boundaries, step out of my comfort zones, and ask hard questions that at times I felt uncomfortable asking, but at the end of the day, it was highly educational for me. I helped bridge a gap between one community and our school community. And then for our whole athletic department to have a better understanding, and our coaches to have a better understanding of what our Muslim athletes were going through. So constantly building on certain things, stepping out of those boundaries, and not really, drawing those lines. And it comes back to finding the similarities between each person, each group, rather than the differences. When I was able to kind of flip that and understand that a little bit better, it really helped me with our relationship building, with the communication between different groups and different individuals.
Yeah, I definitely think it's important to acknowledge and accept that there are differences.
Yes.
And then grow from that point. So that way, that once your counterparts understand and accept and acknowledge that, yes, we are very different people, and then now you guys are on the same level ground where you can start growing and increasing your similarities and then building just on those, so that your differences can be a part of their like growth, and their differences can be a part of your growth, and vice versa.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to just throw those away and just focus on one thing. It is highly important. So hopefully I didn't send that message across. It is important to understand differences, understand where people are coming from, because that's essentially what those differences are. When you understand those, that's when you're going to build a better relationship with different groups, different individuals. And as a leader, it helps you become a better leader, because the more you understand people, the more you understand the people you work with or that work for you, they're going to connect to you more, rather than just you holding yourself up here and not having a connection with anybody. And if you're able to do that, that really helps with your leadership ability.
So let me jump in real quick. So John, we're friends, right?
Yes.
Okay. So like last year, we were driving down the freeway and I saw a sign that said like Polish festival or whatever. And then I said something to Sarah. I was like, "Oh, look, we can go visit the Polacks." Well, I didn't know that was offensive because I had read a book and the guy was Polish and he was talking about like he said Polak all the time. And Sarah was like, "Jeremy, that's like a derogatory term usually." And I was like, "Really?" I was like, "It was in the book. I didn't know." And so as we're talking about all this understanding and this diversity and inclusion, like you also have to be willing to extend grace, just like you said in the very beginning, where you have to be willing to educate. Because I was like, "Oh, well, I didn't know that." I mean, I'm not around Polish people that often, and I didn't know. But luckily, it was with Sarah. But it's just one of those like, if I said, like Marco said that comment about the guy with the making the Chinese thing, you're like, that's not right, Or if I grew up in a family where they said, well, that spick over there, well, that's very offensive to Hispanic, but I didn't know that. So now that I've learned that, okay, my family didn't say that growing up, but I was just saying like, since you guys are talking about Hispanic, so it's very enlightening for me to learn like, okay, well these things are offensive, but then also like some people do saying things that are offensive to me, but I just have to extend the grace, say, hey, that's offensive, and then you just continue to lead from there. So if I blow up and make it a big deal, then they're ready to fight. But if I just pull them to the side or say, hey, that that hurts me because of this, or like I choose not to drink alcohol because my dad was in a car accident and a kid ended up dead, and that's my choice. Like if you choose to drink alcohol, that's your choice, right? But if we have a fight about it and I say you're stupid for drinking alcohol, you're dumb, well then they're just going to drink more or just ignore me, right? And so I think that's one of the key things in leadership is being able to and willing to extend grace. So
definitely. I think it also starts with the educators overall. Like I think in order for us as athletic trainers to become more culturally competent or diverse or and have these practices of inclusion, I think it starts in the education of athletic training. And I think it needs to be kind of stressed in the sense that there isn't much education of cultural competence or cultural awareness in the education. And I think that because we deal with such a diverse population, that in order for us to care for them properly and provide quality care to them, that we should be able to have these educations and like know how to treat athletes who are diabetic, who practice Ramadan, know how to treat athletes who wear a hijab, and understand that there are differences and that we don't want to like step on toes or make them feel uncomfortable in that sense. And without the education as educators, without that knowledge, like it's pushing us backwards in the sense of not being able to provide that quality care that we so stress for.
Yeah, it's very, very important to always ask questions. And if you have to ask individual questions to individual people, it's better to do that than to assume, than to just think that you can do something or think that you could say something because, you may have an assumption on a term or how you are able to treat or how you're able to do certain things. But if you don't ask the actual question and you do something wrong or incorrect, it's a lot harder to explain why you did certain things than why you didn't do certain things. So it's very important to always ask questions, always have a clear understanding as to why you're going to do something, or if this is offensive to certain people, or whatever it is. If you're asking questions, the more questions you ask, the more apt you are to be a better practitioner.
all right, Eva. So we're talking about your research, your DAT program, your doctoral thesis, or whatever you call them, and what are going to be your keys to increasing that diversity and inclusion and leadership? Like, what are they going to be the bullet points? What are going to be things that you really think are going to change the atmosphere, change the climate in leadership?
Like I said, I think it starts with the education. So I think that's going to be where my main focus is, and just evaluating the type and the quantity and of cultural awareness education that we get in order to kind of see where the gap is, so that we can try to mend that and bridge that gap, so that for future athletic trainers that hopefully are more diverse than what the population looks like right now, that they're able to understand the importance of treating athletes who are different than ourselves.
All right, John, you got any other keys to leadership diversity?
I do not. I think Eva really did a good job of kind of encompassing a lot of things. And if it invokes some thoughts and questions, I think that's a really good thing for our listeners.
Yep.
Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate y'all.
All right. So, and there's another thing that I'm going to talk about real quick. Obviously, I have partners with the podcast, and I'll have those listed on there. Every time John's on, we try to mention Myotech because that's his people right down the road. All right. So Myotech, you can check them out using the code DSMB. But Eva actually has her own podcast, and so I was just checking that out for a few minutes today. And that kind of got me thinking, like, it's called Brown Eyes, Caramel Thighs, right? And so it was just thinking, like, by saying that brown girl, or like just how easily that word can be good or bad, right? Because I mean, you're Hispanic, but if I say brown, then is it derogatory? And so it's interesting. So if you want to check out Eva's podcast, I have a link to it. It's sportsmedicinebroadcast.com/Eva. So again, sportsmedicinebroadcast.com/Eva. If you want to check that out. Eva, why don't you give me just like a 1-minute overview of the podcast?
Yeah, for sure. So the podcast name is Brown Eyes and Caramel Thighs, and it's found on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, and Spotify. And we talk a lot about being a brown woman. And so a brown woman can be identified as someone who's Black, Indian, Asian, Persian, all sorts of the color of brown skin. And some white women also relate. As well as we'll talk a lot about leadership, having a seat at the table, breaking glass ceilings, a lot of cultural norms and how it impacts you as a first-generation American, as it impacts you as a first generation in higher education or in education in general, seeking those college degrees, and just kind of like a soundboard for other women of color and brown women that identify and can relate with our experiences, so that we can kind of give them the advice that I know I wanted as a woman, as well as advice as a college graduate.
So very cool. So again, that is sportsmedicinebroadcast.com/Eva Martinez, or you can go to your favorite podcast player and just search up Brown Eyes, chocolate thighs, Caramel Thighs.
That works, chocolate thighs.
So Brown Eyes, Caramel Thighs, and then check out Eva and let her know what you think about the podcast and how it's impacting you, or how you may be able to impact it, and things like that. And so check her out there. This is sportsmedicinebroadcast.com/diversity and inclusion. Eva, what's the best way to get hold of you?
You can Instagram me at Brown Eyes and Caramel Thighs, and you can DM me, email me from that account as well, and we can figure some stuff out if you'd like to be a guest, or just share your topics or any ideas that you guys have that you'd like to hear.
All right, very good. So both John and Marco had to duck out because it's getting late. So I appreciate you joining me, you reaching out, Dr. Koenig connecting us, and then we'll continue to kind of grow together as you help me grow my understanding as a middle-class white American, the stereotypical leadership role, and just helping to grow and include others in that process. So, Eva, thank you so much for being on the Sports Medicine Broadcast. For John Seco, Marco Nunez, Jeremy Jackson, the Sports Medicine Broadcast, that is a wrap. Thanks.
Thank you.